Good afternoon. Or good evening, wherever you may be. It's so great and such an honor to be here with you today. Um, uh, I am coming from the Tucson, Arizona, and um, yeah, I guess I just wanted to start just following up on the slideshow and some of the things that we're thinking about. There was an immigration raid this a couple days ago in Los Angeles, and happening at a car wash. And this car wash, and all of a sudden, these unmarked vehicle pulled in. A number of agents jumped out. They were out of the unmarked vehicle. They were in masks, um, and they ended up raiding this car wash and detaining 3 people. And it turns out in this case, they were from Bortac, which Bortac is a part of the U.S. Border Patrol. It's the SWAT. It's like the SWAT team of the U.S. Border Patrol, a tactical unit. So working in Los Angeles, and I'll get to that in a moment. But they it was representative of these raids that we've been seeing in the past couple of months, especially particularly by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. But in this case, it was interesting, to use one word, I guess, to see that it was actually the U.S. Border Patrol. And what I want to say right off the bat is that this one and the U.S. Border Patrol doing this, or ICE, is not a surprise at all, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that's been following these issues beyond Trump, right? These are uh, this is immigration and border enforcement system that spans decades, and so I kind of want to dissect this scene at the car wash to bring in some of the historic, what is how this could actually happen, how this could actually be historically. And the first thing that we should say is that when Joe Biden was president for the 4 years, and there was a constant calling him, like, saying that he had open borders, right? That was a constant mantra coming from the right wing, especially Fox News or Trump himself. And there could be anything. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. In fact, Joe Biden's presidency was just following what I would call the bipartisan buildup and expansion of a U.S. border and immigration enforcement system that the Trump administration then can bring to its full, to, I guess, the ultimate limits of its, in a lot of ways, its cruelty. So what I want to talk about today is try to like contextualize what we've been seeing going across the United States, with the decades long, or you could even say century long, but I just want to limit it to decades long, massive fortification, dramatic fortification, unprecedented fortification of these systems. And first of all, to look at how could how could the Border Patrol actually be in Los Angeles to begin with? So how far is Los Angeles from the border? It's pretty far from the border. I mean, it's closer to the border than a lot of places, but it's far. It's not right on the border by any means. And one of the reasons they can do that is because the Border Patrol itself operates within a 100-mile zone. I want to start with a 100-mile zone jurisdiction of the Border Patrol, because that kind of gives us one clue of many clues of how all of this stuff could happen and its historic roots. And so the actual 100-mile zone of the Border Patrol started This, you can go back to the 40s and 50s. In the 40s, it was determined that a reasonable number of miles for the Border Patrol to patrol. Now, the Border Patrol was formed in 1924. So a reasonable number of miles was 100 miles. And then this was then validated in the Supreme Court. And since then, there's been what has been called the 100-mile zone or the 100-mile jurisdiction. And to give you an idea of how much this encompasses, this is, you can imagine the contours of the shape of the United States and a band going 100 miles all around. And not only on the US southern border, which is about 2,000 miles long, but along the coast, so up the coast, the Pacific coast, along the northern border with Canada for approximately 5,000 miles, and then down the eastern seaboard. And if you think about this, the entire state of Florida is in the 100-mile zone. The entire state of Maine is in the 100-mile zone. Almost the entire state of Michigan is in the 100-mile zone. It covers 2/3 of the population of the United States, 200 million people. And the ACLU initially, and I say initially because they then changed their definition of it, but they initially called it a constitution-free zone. And now because the ACLU is the ACLU, they definitely don't want to call it a constitution-free zone because, of course, the Constitution, have a legal case, your Constitution should be valid anywhere. But what they meant by that is the Fourth Amendment rights not to be searched nor seized, right? Like not to be interrogated or pulled over or have to go through some random checkpoint or have your stuff searched, all that stuff. You had the Fourth Amendment protects people from that. And so you could call it a constitution mangled zone. So you have these 100-mile zones, and that's a pretty big part of this fortification. I should say also the 100-mile zones for the border, but the border has been having this inland expansion, and I'll get to this in a moment, but Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, definitely is representative of how the border is expanding into the interior very rapidly as well. But for now, that's that the 100-mile zone was set up. The second thing I want to mention in this is the budgets. And I think there's the story when you think of border and immigration enforcement of the narratives that we hear, particularly from the mass media, and then what actually happens via the budgets. So with the budgets, you can again start a lot of places. I like to start around 1994. For those may remember or know that in 1994, Bill Clinton was president of the United States, Democrat. And I use 1994 because that was the year that a number of operations started by the US Border Patrol. Most people, or a lot of people, have heard of Operation Gatekeeper, but there's also Operation Gatekeeper Southern California. There was also Operation Hold the Line. It was also called Operation Blockade, and that started in El Paso. Interesting fact, Operation Blockade was protested by the Mexican government because it sounded too militaristic, right? And so they changed it to Hold the Line. But really, no matter what name they gave these operations, if they're like paramilitary operations. I use paramilitary in the sense that the way that the Border Patrol describes themselves, like as a hybrid between the military and the police. And I would say the same for ICE. And I would say that provides extra context to what we saw at the car wash in LA. And so this paramilitary or this military police hybrid all of a sudden has these operations. These operations then infuse the border, particularly at this point, with lots of money. And the whole idea of these operations was to fortify the border in urban areas. So El Paso, San Diego, San Isidro, you go down Brownsville, you go down the whole line of the border, any sort of urban area would then receive an influx of agents, more wall building. So the wall building, I mean, you can go back further, but a lot of the modern wall building happened in the 90s. especially in urban areas, and then starting with technology. And that sort of three-pronged system, then the whole idea was was a strategy called prevention through deterrence that would then force people crossing the border to go around the urban areas, and then places like Arizona or many places along the southwest border, that meant the desert in areas that were, as put by the Border Patrol memorandum in 1994, when they're explaining the deterrence strategy, that these areas that could be mortal for people crossing. Now, mind you, and that this is all 1994 is another important year that the North American Free Trade Agreement passed that year. So the free market capitalism and its impacts, particularly in Mexico, were keenly observed by the border enforcement system, like Doris Meisner, who was the commissioner of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, that preceded Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection and ICE. She said, prophetically, you could say, in 1992, that there would be high migration coming from Mexico after NAFTA was implemented in 1994, and that we had to build up our border infrastructure because of that. And then she was noting the fact, for one, that US corporations or grain movers like Archer Daniel Midland or Cargill that were going to go into Mexico and sell their corn in Mesoamerica, where the origin of the domestication of corn happened, right? And underprice small farmers that relied on guaranteed prices, that relied on subsidies from the government, who would no longer be able to compete. And so she was absolutely correct. Lots of small farmers and medium-sized farmers were unable to make ends meet, and there were mass migrations that started coming up from Mexico. At the same time, these border operations were happening. And mind you, when Meisner said that in 1992, she said that we had to build up our border to prepare for these mass migrations. And hence, we have these border operations, gatekeeper, hold the line, safeguard. And just at the time, you're looking at massive amounts of money put into the border, more than ever before. So by the end of the Clinton administration in 2000, you have about $4 billion. It goes from about $1.5 billion to $4 billion, to almost triple. Border Patrol goes from about 4,000 to 10,000. And you're looking at, it would have been, oh, wow, this is, a whole border system put in place because of NAFTA, right? Like NAFTA being the free trade, free market capitalism being the main instigator. But I want to say, that's just the first part of what is going to even be, is what's to come after that literally dwarfs the initial stuff under the Clinton administration, because you have 9/11. And so 9/11 happens, and that forms the Department of Homeland Security. And that's when, in 2003, the Department of Homeland Security is implemented. And under the Department of Homeland Security is Customs and Border Protection, CBP, which is Border Patrol, and then ICE. ICE does not exist until 2003. And with 2003, the implementation of DHS, it comes with what is put on top of what is put on the Border and Immigration Enforcement mission is a counterterrorism mission, which, while there was absolutely no one that came across. So if you go to cbp.gov, you'll see that the top mission is to stop terrorists, quote unquote terrorists, and weapons of mass destruction from crossing the border. While none of that happened, what did happen was the budgets just poured into the border and border and immigration enforcement. And you can see that to this day. So when Trump comes into office this year, and I'm going to go back again to the history of it, but when Trump enters this year, he inherits, this isn't even anything that he pushed, he inherits the largest border and immigration enforcement budget ever. So what was approved by the Biden administration last year of over $30 billion? Never before. So mind you, again, to put it in context, 1994, $1.5 billion goes to border and immigration enforcement. In 2025, $30 billion. So when I say it's the most dramatic and unprecedented increase, it's absolutely the truth by looking at the budgets. Those increases increased significantly under the Biden administration. That he inherited about a $24 billion one from Trump and raised it to about $30 billion. So I'm just trying to give you the context of what the narrative that the budget tells versus the kind of rhetorical narrative that we get from a lot of times from mass media or politicians. And so Trump inherits this gigantic budget, this budget that's been growing year after year after year after year after year. And you can look at all the presidencies, like George W. Bush after 9/11. You have the Secure Fence Act of 2006. So you hear a lot about, how Trump is building the border wall. Well, one of the biggest major border walls, first happened in the 90s, as I just explained, but then happened with the Secure Fence Act, which built 650 miles of border wall and border barrier. And that happened between the Bush and Obama administrations. And you talk about technology, there was the SBI net from the 2006 as well, the Secure Border Initiative, which just infused money into the border. And I want to pause there just for a moment, because it is all of this stuff, all of this infrastructure. And the reason I'm concentrating on the budgets so much and the rise in budgets is because there's tons of money to be made, right? And so you start seeing these big conventions around the United States, one in particular called the Border Security Expo, that started in 2005, and that brought in lots of private companies who then met with the US government, particularly Department of Homeland Security, particularly Customs and Border Protection and ICE, to then try to sell their products. And what I would say is what I would call the border industrial complex. And I want to kind of look at the border industrial complex also to explain how we get to this moment with Trump, how the budgets just grow and grow year after year. You think, for example, with the Bush administration, it goes from about 4 billion to 15 billion. You're talking with the post 9/11 Bush administration probably put more money into border and immigration enforcement than any other administration. The thought was Obama would come in 2008, 2009, and change that. Well, then the Obama administration didn't do any of that, and deported more people. Now, like the deportation apparatus, the increase of detention centers, the creation of this fleet called ICE Air being the ICE's deportation fleet. They have their own airline they call ICE Air. All that was created during this time. And during the Obama administration, he deported more people than all presidents of the 20th century combined. And so that's why a lot of immigration rights activists called Obama the deporter in chief. And so the continuation of how the border budgets never went down, the deportation budgets never went down, they just go up and up and up. So during the time of the Obama administration was when I started going to the Border Security Expo myself as a reporter. And I tell you, if you ever want to go and just get a crystal ball of what is happening along these lines, along what the border is and along how the border is expanding and how it's very much the interior, how to understand like a lot of the impetus behind the raids and what is going on as far as the enforcement that we're seeing and completely ramped up right now. The Border Security Expo just offers a lot of answers to this. And so as a reporter and a journalist, I've gone for, since I think my first was in 2012, and I went just this last year. And when you go to the Border Security Expo, it is like walking into a crystal ball of the future. Like you go and see, it's almost like going into a science fiction novel in a lot of ways. You walk into like a big exhibition hall and you see exactly, like I remember going in 2012 and thinking, there's no way this stuff is going to end up on the border. It is literally like what, looking at like one of, I forget the name of a good science fiction novel, but it's literally like reading one of those and thinking, oh, that's something so futuristic that it would be hard to believe, like all these drone systems and unmanned ground vehicles, like robots crawling over the carpet. So you go into this big exhibition hall, there's banners hanging down from all these different companies. There's cameras and biometric systems and license plate readers and firearms and you name it, like ready to eat meals, like all these different, but it's like going into this technological place, but where money is being made. So like I remember talking in 2012 to different vendors, and they were talking about how the United States was winding down wars in Afghanistan and Iraq at that time, and thinking, okay, so we're looking for new markets now, and this new market is the border and immigration enforcement. So we're trying to jump, we're repurposing our military equipment to then to serve a homeland security application, as they say. And literally that's what they were doing. So like surveillance blimps, like you see these on the border, like these gigantic blimps that can see hundreds of miles away of their cameras. And the different technologies right now in Arizona, an Israeli company called Elbit Systems has constructed 50 what are called integrated fixed towers along the Arizona-Mexico border. And these are with highly sophisticated cameras that could see 10 miles, a ground sweeping radar system that was all tested first on Palestinians. And then after that, after it got the stamp of approval, then it was allowed, or that's what the Elbit Systems used to say, oh, we can sell our equipment, we can promote our equipment around the world. And when the United States, when CBP was looking for new technology in 2012, they put out a request for proposals. Elbit Systems sent them a video saying just that. This has been tested in what they called the world's most dangerous border, in quotes. And then the United States bought the system in 2014, all under the Obama administration, right? So surveillance equipment that was tested on Palestinians has now been completed. 50 such towers now are on in southern Arizona. So all of this stuff you see at the Border Security Expo, you see, as I said before, like a border enforcement system, like the border industrial complex play out right before your eyes. So I want to that now concentrate on the one I went to this year. So I went to about 7 or 8 of them. This year, I went to the Border Security Expo. It was in Phoenix, Arizona. And this was the first year of the new Trump administration. And so it was different in many ways. It was a packed house, for one. The borders are whatever that means. I'm not even sure what that means. It's a term that has appeared in the past, and it's not a term that has any sort of binding power. But yet, Trump anointed Thomas Homan as the border czar, and he was a former ICE commissioner. He to describe him charitably, I guess, would be to say he is iron-fisted when going after, anyone who's undocumented in the country, and wants to deport people en masse. So I guess Donald Trump assumed that he would be a perfect person for his mass deportation plans. So he spoke as a keynote, and also Kristi Noem. Kristi Noem spoke as a as a keynote as well. So I want to say a couple things about the Border Security Expo this year, because it was very interesting for a couple of reasons. The one reason was that that the whole open borders part of what Trump people were doing, or I would say right-wing media especially, was doing during the Biden years, was then completely, it was then repeated over and over again during this. So there was a 94% decrease in border crossings, for example, and everyone was taking credit for that, saying, oh, the Trump administration policies were working like a charm. And in reality, so when they were saying this, I just kept thinking, and they were getting these rousing standing ovations from the audience, and the audience. So I was one of the few journalists there. There was a handful of us, but mostly this was industry. So industry people, vendors, representatives of different companies, and those industry representatives would stand and give standing ovations to Noam, to Homan, and I found that very curious, because if you look at Biden's years, his 4 years, and this, I think this represents the bipartisan nature of this. In Biden's 4 years, he had the most cumulative budgets ever. As I just said, Trump inherited his 2025 budget from the Biden administration, over $30 billion. And 2024 was the first year it went over $30 billion. And if you take the 4 years of Biden, he had more money in his budget than any other president in the history of the United States in those 4 years. And it turns out also, he was by far the largest private contractor of any president in the United States by 10 billion. The second largest was Trump during his first term, and he gave out about $20 billion in contracts. And Biden, in his 4 years, the last 4 years, gave out, I think it was 32 billion. It's an estimate. I don't have the number in front of me, but something like that. $32 billion in contracts. So he not only beat Trump, he beat Trump by a mile. So his large number of contracts given out to private companies. And on top of that, there was at the Border Security Expo, and this was in early April that I was there. There was tons of talk about the mass deportations, right? Developing a mass deportation system. And I couldn't help to think, having studied the issue pretty closely, that thinking about the previous 4 years of the Biden administration, the top contractor was this company called Deployed Resources. And Deployed Resources makes the infrastructure of detention. So they got contracts to build what they call soft-sided facilities along the US-Mexico border, places where people would be detained if they were to be rounded up. So what could be roundup or deportation or detention camps were being financed and contracted by the Biden administration with all these contracts and with these huge budgets. So I was thinking of that, and it was surprising to see the rousing ovations from industry, knowing that these truths, knowing that there was a lot of contracts doled out by the Biden administration. And now I see that those rounding ovations were maybe not even because of it wasn't not noticing that, it was because of the potential of what could come across with this Trump administration. Definitely see how it goes into the language of maintaining a status quo, and particularly maintaining the interests of the United States. You hear that a lot, like the US interests, protecting US interests, and they mean it like macro, right? By that, they mean the interests of US corporations, US, US imperialism. I take it as that. The United States extension around the world, the hegemony. And within that context, while at these events, climate change is not necessarily talked about. It is talked about everywhere else, like in projections. Like if you go to market forecasts about homeland security or border security and the projections, these companies do projections, they always look at displacement due to changing climate conditions, stuff like that. They always use that language, and they show that there will be increase in profits. So the idea of profit being correlated with disaster is very much a part of it. And furthermore, if you go and look at the military or DHS and their assessments, they have they're always they don't look at the future without looking at climate change, and explicitly talk about not anything, no sort of climate refugee status, at least from DHS or Pentagon, no sort of climate refugee status or anything like that. What is discussed is how to prepare our borders for mass migrations. So the correlations of that and potential mass migrations are pretty explicit. Yeah, there's definite connections between companies that are present at the Border Security Expo and other expos. That's one example of many examples of these sorts of expos, and they're across the world too. I went to a couple in Israel as well. These companies and lobbying and campaign financing, both of those are considerable. You see increased lobbying from companies, especially around appropriations. When appropriations, the budget talks happen around DHS, you'll see these top companies that will go in there and get behind closed doors. You know, they don't report all their lobbying, but you know it's happening, and they report some of it. So there's enough of it to know that it's happening, and they're getting behind closed doors and influencing our policymakers, you know, our budget appropriations committees and stuff like that. And of course, and they get in behind the Homeland Security committees, you know, those committees that are making or suggesting laws and promoting, and then definitely as far as correlation of profit, when you're in a border industrial complex and looking at through that lens, then there has to be no solution, right? And there has to be, you know, the idea that this stuff is needed, that this stuff both works and it quote unquote works and is needed in order to, and so they're implicit, like there's no, like, what's the word, smoking gun, I guess. I haven't found anything saying, oh, we definitely want more anti-immigrant, you know, like the promotion of it, like this, a company saying, though the more as I talk, I'd like to investigate this more, because my hunch is that there's got to be some stuff out there that connects the, you know, some definitely companies with anti-immigration bills, but to my knowledge, there isn't any. I do remember one quick thing was when there was a comprehensive immigration reform bill that got passed by the Senate. I think it was 2014 or 13 or 12. But anyhow, I remember going to a border security expo, and the vendors, after the comprehensive immigration reform got passed, and mind you, this had $45 billion to the border, $45 billion to the border. They were all talking about this comprehensive immigration reform as, this has to pass, because this passes, we're going to make a lot of money. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, thanks so much for your comment, and I think you're right on, and I appreciate your thinking and feedback, and I think you have some really good insights there and some really good questions. I think those are questions that we really need to like explore, because it seems like we're on automatic in a lot of ways, or not we, I don't mean we here, you know, I hope you know it, like we in terms of how the world is moving, often in this like automatic, like the day by day, the status quo, which brings me to the initial question about liberals, and how I think the comment and the questions go kind of hand in hand, because that kind of automatic and living in automatic, I can see a lot, especially in the partisan divide, and from the liberal side, and the kind of I'd be at brunch, like you mentioned. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but it's kind of funny comment. The thing is, it's probably true that that kind of identifies what the problem is, right? That if Kamala was president, then I'd be at brunch and I wouldn't be paying attention. And like how like few people know, the over the 4 years of Joe Biden, and how like one of the things that I find nobody really knows is that he deported or removed 4.5 million people. He topped Trump's initial term by 3 million people. And but I never heard the word mass deportation, with Biden. You didn't hear like those words you hear, the kind of words that you hear with Trump. It's like they don't exist with a Democratic administration. That it's not the border and immigration isn't covered. Immigration raids have been happening now for decades. I remember when I was writing my first book, I was looking into ICE raids that go into and I remember reading this report. People could go back and look at it. It's called the Cardoso report, and it's from, I think it's Columbia University. I think it was Columbia University or so. I can't remember. It was the University of New York City. But they did this extensive report on ICE raids, and had all these testimonies of ICE going into people's houses at 6 a.m., 5 a.m., following military tactics of going in when people are they're most disoriented, when they aren't. And I interviewed like a family where ICE came in, and they came into their house, and grabbed the father, and right in front of their kids. It's 6 a.m. Nobody's really awake. And then they put him in this white van that was unmarked. So using unmarked vehicles has been something that ICE has been doing for a long time, and just taking him away. And the kids are like, who just kidnapped our dad? You know? And that this stuff has been going on for so long. You can't, it's for it to be like turned on and turned off depending on who's president is a huge problem. And just to go to the comment to like think of how we can imagine things differently, that sort of that kind of framing of it and understanding of this, like, yeah, Trump is Trump, and he's doing what he's going to do in ways that are further than anyone else. He's definitely ramping it up. But to put that in a vacuum of Trump, and not to understand it as a massive bipartisan system, is to not understand correctly the problem. And then if you don't understand the problem correctly, the solution does not come. And that's, you could look at how Biden took over from Trump. Like, he was going to do this, he's going to do that. He wasn't going to build one more foot of wall. Well, he did build another foot of wall. He kept Title 42. He kept Remain in Mexico. There's a lot of things that were kept in place or accelerated. The budgets went up, but then nobody paid attention, right? So I mean, not nobody, again, like the kind of national narrative wasn't there. So how do we kind of move that over and start reframing it and looking at it in a different way? And then how do our imaginations, or collective imaginations, how can our collective imaginations alter and change with that? Yeah, both good questions. It's that one of the things about ICE that just, yeah, that I've been noticing throughout the research I've done in this capacity over the years, is how they don't identify. They go in unmarked vehicles. They like when in Tucson, I see Border Patrol all the time. They're very well marked. They have the green stripe in their Border Patrol. But ICE, they could be, I mean, Border Patrol goes on unmarked vehicles too, I'm sure, but most I see a lot of the green striped Border Patrol. ICE, they don't have any marked vehicles or and this masked. Now there's been incidents in the past where agents have been masked, but this what we've been seeing lately is above and beyond what at least I've ever seen before and looking into these issues. So this identityless, uh, in a way, like agency that has all this tremendous power, is it's chilling to watch and knowing like it comes from the groundwork. There's been a groundwork made, especially with ICE, of this non-identification or this um this anonymity. I'm not pronouncing that word. Anonymity. I can't pronounce that word right now. But this anonymous nature of what ICE is doing. Yet, like the ICE PIOs who I've PIO is public information officer who I've interviewed, they always identify themselves. They'll be in these uniforms. It's hard to say. They're like one of those. I hate to use a word that might not be completely accurate, but it's sort of accurate, like the Gestapo or something. It's this whole secret police that has this power. I do believe, as far as warrants are concerned, they are supposed to show a warrant if they're to go into somebody's house. Like Border Patrol as well, they have to show a warrant to go even a dwelling 25 miles from the border, but they can go on people's properties. So they are supposed to show warrants. I know there are so many cases where warrants are not presented. And so there's that part of it. There's I guess one could say rogue. I hate to use the word rogue because I think this it's very systematic. And when they're doing things like that, I think they're pushing the limits and doing it on purpose. So rogue implies to me that somebody's going off kilter. And in reality, I think the way they are operating is not rogue. It's part of the system and part of like this iron fist of keeping people in their place. Now, as in terms of like how to effectively protest, that if there's one thing to be kind of excited about in the last little bit, I think, is to see these protests that are present. It's like Los Angeles, for example, and seeing just people, getting up. And I mean, not even only Los Angeles, I've seen it in a bunch of places where people stand between ICE, ICE agents, masked ICE agents, and putting their bodies on the line. Those sorts of protests and the visibility, like for an agency that's constantly invisible, right? And what we were just discussing, to make them so visible and protest them so mightily, is new. Again, like it's not new because they've been protested before, and there's been different times. But to go back to the brunch comment, there's a lot of people out to brunch, during the Biden years when there's deportations happening. And so to have the people come out to the streets and really make it visible. And I think one of the things to do in this time is to then show like what's going on in the Trump, because obviously I'm not trying to demean the ramp up or what's going on and how it's happening and how like the Trump is going for a mass deportation. He is requesting budgets that are going to be beyond anything else. And we're seeing glimpses of what might be to come. So, but to go out to protest in the streets and then to start reframing it as a bipartisan apparatus that does not go away. If Trump goes out of office in 4 years, it will not go away. It does not go away. It continues happening. And so I think that to be able to turn these protests and bring in this sort of more new messaging to them to understand this in bigger ways, could be effective, and I'd like to see that. But just the bigger protests in general, I think are very encouraging. Thanks. Yeah, good question. Thanks for the questions. It reminds your last question reminds me of finding out that I think it was the Dominican Republic. This is several years ago, so I might have this off. I think it was Dominican Republic had a maquila, or a factory that was making Border Patrol uniforms. So that's sort of how vast the tentacles of I guess the industrial complex is mind-boggling, I guess, to use one word. But let me take the questions in order. The Democratic Party, I think you're right in saying, thinking of, I mean, the first thing I think of is propaganda. I do think they've done things that are I guess, like, I know that like Obama administration takes credit for DACA, for example, the 2000, I think it was in 2014, the law, like looking to protect kids who came in with their parents when they were young. But you talk to like the youth movements or immigration rights movements and immigrant rights movements, and they'll say this is the pressure that we put on. And I always think to that, and I think, well, that's that. One of the things about the Democrats is they can get pressured. There's perhaps maybe it's easier to pressure the Democrats in certain ways, and they might do things that Trump would never do. I mean, that's a possibility. And I think I can't help to though also think of when Biden's campaign in 2020, when he said, he very much took an anti-border stance, or I'm not going to build one more foot of wall. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. We're going to treat immigrants in the country with dignity. Said all this stuff, and then he came into power, and it just continued. Everything just continued on as usual. And I did a report looking at campaign contributions, to go back to the border industrial complex stuff, that looked at campaign contributions to the Biden campaign versus Trump campaign by the top 10 or 15, maybe. I think it was top 15 border companies, or companies in the border industry. And I was surprised. I was expecting it would be even, like 1-to-1. And it was actually 3-to-1 in favor of Biden getting money from the border industry. So, I mean, it's stuff like that. There's stuff that you look at on the ground, stuff that's sad, and then the stuff that happens. And I think the key is just looking at the stuff that happens. And that brings me to looking at the industry. The industry is just like gigantic. It's all these companies, they all are trying to get, like, I don't even think they care where they're going, right? It's like, I used to go to the Border Security Expo because it focuses on the United States, but I've been to other similar ones abroad, including the one called Milipol in Paris. And that one was the biggest one I've ever seen. I mean, so many companies and so many countries represented there, and everyone's trying to sell to everyone. And it's the same, it's the technological stuff and all that stuff, the same stuff, biometrics, surveillance cameras, guns, weapons, you name it. And it's, yeah, when you look at the market, one border doesn't even matter. It's like they look at it like the world of filled with borders. And this is a part of the scary part we haven't really talked about, but this idea of the extension of borders around the world. The United States is doing this quite a bit. It's called externalization. They're extending their borders to Mexico-Guatemala border, to the Guatemalan-Honduran border, to the Dominican Haiti border to cross. I did a book on this and went to many places, including like the Jordanian Syrian border, where Raytheon Corporation just got a $300 million contract to build a virtual wall, a surveillance system wall between Jordan and Syria, with US funding, managed by a retired US Border Patrol agent. So this idea of this extension around the world is very prevalent. The Philippines, the same. They got this $50 million financing from the United States to build another Raytheon-made command and control center in the Manila Bay, then to put up surveillance towers on all kinds of islands, the islands around the Philippines. So you have that sort of extension, and then so on a macro level, and the micro level, like each company subcontracts to so many different companies. Like Elbit Systems, which is the big Israeli company, right, that I was talking about. When they were building in Arizona, they were subcontracting with all these smaller companies, including a bunch of Tucson-based companies, like International Towers. So International Towers, which is a small company in Tucson, all of a sudden had this big subcontract with Elbit Systems. No one knew that they were associated with them. You had to do digging, but they're the ones really hauling out the infrastructure for the towers and building it. And they're just one of many subcontractors of many different things, like security companies. They go out, when they're building the towers, they had an armed security agent there, because I went up there, tried to talk to them all, and I first met this guy with a gun that told me I could go no further, right? So this whole thing, it expands and expands. Detention centers, like you were saying, they're all around the world. There's this organization called I think it's called the Global Detention Network, something like that. I forget what it's called, but it's something like that. But they have a map of all the detention centers all around the world, and they're clustered around the European borders, where externalization is happening, around Australia, around the United States. You can see the patterns, right? You can see the patterns of how these things are constructed.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's all the questions that we have today. Thank you so much, Todd, for your presentation and for answering our questions. We really, really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, I was wondering if you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience.
Oh, I think no. I mean, I think you had really great questions. It was interesting at the Border Security Expo that I went to. Christine Ohm, who's the Department of Homeland Security secretary, she went on this whole thing about how Bukele, the president of El Salvador, and you remember how El Salvador has been taking in deportees, right, from the United States, and how she was so enthusiastic that this was happening. So this externalization was being represented. But she went into like how Bukele had his epiphany about how this would happen. And she described this long story that Bukele told her about coming to the United States before he was inaugurated president, and going to a Target. And he went to the Target, and this, I think, I'm trying to end with this because it goes into like how everything's just associated with this mass capitalistic world we live in. And I know that everyone here is trying to challenge that. And Bukele said that he went to Target and had this epiphany watching people going through the checkout lines. He was like, oh, people are streaming through 5 lines of the automated checkout line. And this is how he wanted to live. And so that's what then he wants El Salvador to be like that, to be a place where people can check out. That was the dream, where people can check out, in fluid motion. And she presented that as like this realization how great the United States is and how the United States needs to be emulated. So I thank all of you like for being here, because I know and I sense, a yearn, a longing, a want, a dream, an action, right? For about another world, like another world's possible. Otro mundo es posible, as the Zapatistas say. Another world is possible. And it's great, like gatherings like this, or many different things that people can do, spark those imaginations and push us forward into like, forging something new. And that's what I think we're forced to do at this point. There's too much coming down the pike, too much climate, everything's just coming to a front. And this is one of the things that we're seeing with the immigration raids and Border Patrol increasing, is that it's at its front. They're trying to maintain the status quo. And that means there's a fragility to it, and we can push into that. So I applaud you for all your work, and thanks for coming out today. And I look forward to working together in the future.